Billionaire Larry Ellison just handed Yala something no endorsement deal, no coaching contract, no trophy could ever replace, and Rome witnessed every second of it. A private jet, a standing ovation, a legend named Nadal frozen in disbelief, and a 19-year-old girl from the Philippines who could barely breathe. Nobody scripted this, nobody predicted this, but when the wealthiest man in tennis looked across the red clay of the Foro Italico and chose her, the entire sport felt the shockwave. What unfolded inside Rome in May 2025 wasn't merely a gesture, it was a declaration, a transfer of power, a crowning witnessed by thousands, remembered by millions. Stay until the final second of this video, because what Nadal said afterwards, that's the part nobody saw coming. Rome doesn't welcome anyone quietly. The Foro Italico, that ancient, sun-hammered cathedral of red clay, has swallowed careers whole. It has broken champions, humiliated giants, and reduced decorated veterans to rubble inside 90 furious minutes. And in May 2025, when Alexandra Yala, 19 years old, ranked a career-best number 70 in the world, carrying the weight of an entire nation on her left-handed serve, walked through those gates for her first ever Italian Open main draw, the clay offered her no mercy whatsoever. She drew Marta Kostyuk in the opening round, world number 27, a Ukrainian warrior who had just reached the quarterfinals at Madrid the week before, a player who had risen 9 spots in a single week, whose ground strokes arrive like artillery shells, whose mental composure under pressure borders on terrifying. The match lasted 53 minutes. Kostyuk dismantled Yala 6-0, 1-1. Surgical, suffocating, absolute. And yet, here is the detail the headlines buried. Yala did not crumble. She did not disappear. She shook Kostyuk's hand, lifted her chin, walked off Campo Centrale, and within 48 hours resurfaced beside Coco Gauff in the double straw, with fire still burning behind her eyes. Because that is who Yala is. She doesn't dissolve under defeat. She recalibrates, she reloads, she returns. Her doubles partnership with Gauff, formed at a tournament where Yala had already absorbed a humiliating singles exit, became one of the most electric collaborations Rome had witnessed in years. Together, they dismantled Alexandra Panova and Fanny Stolar 6-3, 6-1. Dominant, controlled, joyful. A Filipina teenager and an American world number 3 moving through Rome's hallowed courts as though they had trained together for years rather than days. The crowd noticed, the cameras noticed, and somewhere high above the Foro Italico, inside a private suite overlooking Campo Centrale, a billionaire noticed too. But before we get there, understand what Yala's presence in Rome actually represented. This wasn't a wildcard story. This wasn't a feel-good filler narrative between marquee names. This was the first Filipino player in history to compete in the Italian Open main draw as a legitimate top 100 professional, the first person from her nation to breach that boundary. Every step she took on Rome's clay was a step nobody from the Philippines had ever taken before. Filipino fans tracked her matches across 12 time zone differences, gathering in living rooms at 3 in the morning, watching on phone screens propped against pillows, screaming into WhatsApp groups that lit up like emergency alerts with every point she won. Sports journalists who had covered her breakthrough at the Miami Open, where she defeated number 5 Madison Keys and number 2 Iga Swiatek back-to-back as a wildcard, wrote that Yala's influence on Philippine tennis resembled something close to what Manny Pacquiao once did for boxing, a figure who didn't merely represent a sport, a figure who redefined what an entire people believed was possible. She arrived in Rome carrying all of that. Every generation of Filipino dreamers who had watched Grand Slam tennis from a distance, wondering whether someone who looked like them, who played with the style and the fire that she plays with, could ever stand where the greatest players on earth stand. She arrived in Rome carrying all of that, and the clay took her apart in 53 minutes. But Rome wasn't finished with her yet, and neither was the billionaire watching from above. Stay right here, because what happened next at the Foro Italico changed everything, not just for Yala, for the entire sport. You need to understand who Larry Ellison is before you understand why his choice of Alex Yala shattered the tennis world. Oracle. The name alone carries the weight of decades. Co-founded in 1977, Ellison built it from nothing, from a rented office, a borrowed idea, and a ferocious competitive instinct that his rivals described in court documents as borderline mythological, into one of the most dominant software empires in human history. His estimated net worth as of early 2026 stands between $201 and $203 billion. In September 2025, after a surge in Oracle's stock, he briefly became the wealthiest individual alive with an estimated fortune of $393 billion. But wealth, even wealth of that magnitude, doesn't explain Ellison. What explains Ellison is tennis. Not as a hobby, not as a weekend pastime for the ultra-rich, as an obsession, as a mission. In 2009, when the Indian Wells Tennis Garden faced financial collapse, when international buyers from Shanghai and Qatar circled its prestigious calendar slot like vultures, Ellison made one call. He purchased the entire facility and its tournament for $100 million, then invested another $100 million improving it. He built a second stadium seating 8,000. He introduced Hawkeye line calling across every match court before any other event on Earth. He transformed what had been a struggling desert tournament into what players, journalists, and broadcasters now call the fifth Grand Slam. The 2024 edition drew 493,440 attendees. The 2025 edition shattered that record with 504,268, surpassing the French Open's total attendance in the equivalent window. Prize money reached $19 million, a number so high that rival tournament owners formally complained he was distorting the economics of the entire tour. Ellison didn't apologize. He reinvested. His involvement in tennis extended further. He became an investor and strategic partner with Universal Tennis, the company behind the global UTR rating system. He joined forces with Team 8, the organization co-founded by Roger Federer himself. He poured resources into ATP and WTA Challenger events, into American collegiate tennis, into the infrastructure of a sport he believed had been chronically underinvested and chronically undervalued. Tennis can change, he once said through a Universal Tennis announcement, if the right people build the right tools and refuse to settle for what already exists. He was worth north of $100 billion before most current WTA players were born. And in May 2025, in Rome, at the Foro Italico, with the Italian Open in full swing and the world's greatest women's tennis players competing on its sacred red clay, Ellison had his attention fixed on one name. Not Sabalenka, not Swiatek, not Gauff. Yala. Why? Because Ellison doesn't chase what everyone else already sees. He moves early. He identified Serena Williams as a transcendent force before television knew what to do with her. He invested in tennis infrastructure before any other billionaire considered it worthwhile. He bought Indian Wells when the rest of the financial world said the acquisition made no sense. He has a pattern. He spots something extraordinary before the crowd arrives. He acts, and then he watches the world catch up. In Rome, he spotted Alex Yala. And what he prepared in response, what arranged without a publicist, without a press release, without a coordinated announcement, would become the most discussed single moment in women's tennis that entire season.
Let's slow down, because it would be dangerously easy and dangerously incomplete to reduce the story to a heartwarming generosity. A billionaire gives a teenager a jet ride. Beautiful, moving. Share it. Done. That framing misses what is genuinely significant here. Larry Ellison's investment in Indian Wells wasn't charitable sentiment, it was strategic vision. He identified an undervalued asset, injected capital where institutional players had hesitated, and transformed it into the most commercially dominant non-Grand Slam tournament on Earth. His $200 million in Indian Wells produced a venue drawing 500,000 attendees annually and generating $852 million in regional economic impact per event. He doesn't act without calculation. He acts with conviction, and the calculation follows from vision, not the other way around. When Ellison identified Alex Eala as worth a private jet gesture, he wasn't simply being generous. He was making a statement about where women's tennis was heading, about who its future faces would be, about which markets, the Philippines, Southeast Asia, the vast and largely untapped audience of a region with 680 million people, represented the sport's most consequential growth frontier. Eala's breakthrough at Miami had already demonstrated the commercial proposition. Sponsors emerged. Filipino broadcasts of her matches drew ratings no WTA event had previously generated in the country. Advertisers who had never engaged with tennis discovered, through her story, an audience with enormous purchasing power and extraordinary emotional investment in a player who represented something deeply personal to them. Ellison saw all of that, and he saw something else. He saw a player whose technical profile, whose left-handed baseline game, whose mental structure under pressure, whose age relative to trajectory placed her among the 5 most interesting developing players on the WTA Tour. Not ranked among the top 5, developing towards somewhere within the top 5, within years, not decades. And he moved early, as he always does. But here's the uncomfortable question worth sitting with. What does it mean for a sport's future when a single billionaire, rather than institutional structures, tour governing bodies, or equitable prize systems, determines which emerging player receives the infrastructure she needs to fulfill her potential? What happens to the players Ellison doesn't notice, the ones just as talented, just as dedicated, just as deserving of a private jet and a quiet moment in a hospitality suite where someone powerful looks them in the eye and says, "You are going to change this sport"? Eala deserved everything that happened in Rome, completely, undeniably. But the story of what happened to her is also, simultaneously, a story about what doesn't happen to the dozens of players from Nigeria, from Vietnam, from Bolivia, from everywhere the sport barely reaches, who will never sit across from a man worth $200 billion. That tension doesn't diminish the beauty of what Rome produced. It deepens it. It asks more of the sport than a single billionaire's generosity can answer. And perhaps that is precisely why Nadal's words carried such gravity. He's lived inside professional tennis long enough to understand what it provides to some and withholds from others. When Nadal recognized Eala, when he named her future with that quiet certainty, he wasn't just acknowledging her talent, he was acknowledging the rarity of a path like hers and the weight of arriving at its visible beginning. We're almost at the end, and the final chapter, this is the one that stays with you forever.